to both. And, oh, it still says Marilyn joining. I'm gonna move it down so it block a little bit, but welcome everybody.
Happy to be here.
I have 7 o'clock. We've got 12 of us. I'm sure more will come in, but let's get started. Anybody new who has not been here before? I think we have all been here before, so we will continue. With the bracha, Baruch Ata Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Praised are you, ever-present our God, sovereign of all time and space, who brings holiness to our lives through the mitzvah of living out words of Torah. And admitting 2 more. A quick overview. We are in the second of 2 units from the faith volume of the 4 different volumes. The first 2 were from peoplehood. Next week we go to practice, and we're doing just 1 lesson from practice, and then the final session together until you guys pick which ones you want to continue with, will be from the volume on ethics. This is an overview of the faith volume. It comes in 3 sessions: understanding faith, and we did class 1 last week and are doing class 2, unit 1 tonight, faith, trust, and risk. That is tonight's topic. Complexities of faith we are not getting to in this 6-week session. Arguments and submission. Judaism as an interpretive tradition. Now I want to note that particular class. The Hartman people recommended that as a starting session for any of the foundations for Jewish, for thoughtful Judaism. So I may do that class as a one-off, standalone session if you are interested in something like that. And then God in our lives is the 3rd unit. So you can see what we're doing, what we're covering, and what we are not. There are these 2 podcasts that I found from the faith volume, 2 out of these 3, and I do not remember which of the 2 are available, but again, you will get this document as a PDF after tonight's class. Any comments? I'm going to stop the screen share for a moment, and as we go back and forth with this. And I want to invite any comments or reactions to last week's class. Hi, Kendra.
Oh, sorry, I was muted. Sorry, I missed last week's class. That's my comment.
That's okay. I sent the video out if you want to, waste your time. Spend your time on it.
No, I had a very little person I had to take care of.
Got it.
I had 2 last week.
Yay, grandchildren. Any other comments or reactions to last week? Well, I am going to do a summary. It's the slide that Peter liked at the very end, as I recall, he said. So we're going back to the screen share, or the screen share screen. I want to, and this was the summary from last week. We looked at 3 very different ways of refracting the story. Basically, this is an interpretation of Abraham and how God chose Abraham and how Abraham chose God. One was the importance of a journey, displacement, the idea of going somewhere and not knowing where you're going. The other is the importance of intellect and ritual. Even if others may disagree with your conclusions, you have what you know to be true. And finally, the importance of encounter, experience of something that you subjectively understand. And we looked at these as different pathways to faith and different sort of flavors of faith, or within each faith tradition, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, the kind of faith life you lead is, to some extent, your own, how you came to it could reflect any of these and will therefore be very different, not about like sort of what you believe, but about how you encounter a life of faith. Tonight, we are looking not at, let me go to my summary here. If last week was about how people arrive at faith, tonight is what does faith actually mean? What does one believe in when they say they have faith? So tonight, the topic is faith, trust, and risk. I would say that faith, well, Hartman says, but I agree, and I cut and paste it. Faith is a choice that people make. That's a very important sentence. We can unpack that and spend a long time with it, but we have 5 texts for tonight, so I'm going to press on a little bit. What form does faith take? And here is, just as we admit, Andrea, here is the fundamental insight of tonight's class. Basically, we've got 3 texts that are going to look at a fundamental distinction in the nature of faith, and then 2 other sort of reflections on that. For some, faith is about creed or dogma. You could say faith that. And that leads to a concept of sort of truth. It offers a commitment to certain truths, even if those truths are not ultimately verifiable. For others, faith is about relationship, as in the term faithfulness. In a romantic partnership, a business partnership, a friendship, this could be called faith in. Faith in this case is less about certain truths and more about trust and loyalty, which form the heart of all relationships. When people enter relationships, each person manifests trust in the other. In return, each person commits to be loyal to the other person. What do you think faith means? And what or who do we believe in? So let me stop the share. Your turn. All of a sudden you're shy. What do you think faith is? What does it mean to you? What's it about? How would you describe it? What does someone believe in?
Well, trust without clear evidence.
Trust without clear evidence. I like that. Who said that?
Jennifer.
Jennifer, hi. Trust without clear evidence. Good. Okay. Anyone else?
I'll go to the one further, trust with evidence. I don't put my trust in people.
Who was it? Was it Reagan? Is trust but verify?
Trust but verify, yeah.
Right.
Trust with evidence. I mean, I don't put my faith in people unless they've proven themselves to me and I've proven myself to them.
Okay. All right. Kendra, Mark Borden's an attorney. Anyone else?
That depends a little bit on what kind of faith you're talking about. If you're talking about faith in somebody that you don't really know very well to do something or follow through on something or to be somebody that you want to deal with, then maybe it would be faith with evidence. But if you're talking about whether you're willing to have faith in another person on a more emotional level, for whatever reason, in whatever relationship, I think it may be more of what Jennifer was referring to, of the without evidence. It's like, I know this person, so I have no evidence that they're going to do whatever it is that I'm having faith that they're going to do, but I believe in them. I'm going to have faith in them.
Part of this is not culture.
You're being the optimist. I'm always the pessimist.
First of all, Warren Buffett apparently was quoted today as saying optimism is the is the key to success. I should learn something from that. But I'm reminded right now. I've been thinking about Erik Erikson. Erik Erikson is a psychologist who wrote about that we all go through stages in life. And actually, I was reading an article in the Reform Jewish Quarterly, which is talking about this particular issue is about disruption in 21st century Jewish life. Very interesting, pandemic as being a great example. But how do we, disruption, one part of it is aging. And I've always focused on Erickson as the end of the life cycle, because he said the last test we go through is sort of integrity versus despair. We look at our lives and we see that everything flows together, or we look at our lives and all we can see is the choices that we should have made or could have made. And those are two different, that's sort of the last test in life. But do any of you remember Erickson enough to remember what the first one is? In infancy.
No.
So the infancy, Erickson's first test is trust and versus mistrust. Either we get fed on demand, or we have to sit there and cry for what, right? It's as infants, either the world is secure or the world is not secure. And Erickson said, at least, that our basic orientation of whether we are like Mark Borden or like Jennifer Arellano, right? Whether we are like trust without the ability to verify it, or you need to make sure when you meet a new person, do you basically like them until you have a reason not to? Or do you basically not like them until you have a reason to like them?
I was just thinking about the word faith, and it's not just one word. I mean, if I'm thinking about faith in God or faith in that kind of thing, that's a different, completely for me, a very different kind of feeling than it is if I'm talking about faith that I have in people or in situations, or, it's almost like faith and hope in those situations become one word. So,
well, Marilyn, that's very Maimonidean of you. That is, Maimonides says that the language we use in our daily life is not the same as we may use the same word, but it means different things. So that was very Rambam, Marilyn. I'm much more like Martin Buber. The only way that and we're going to encounter both Rambam and Buber tonight in a couple minutes. The only way that we can understand God is by analogy to the experiences we have in the world around us. So those are two different ways of looking at this. Let's move on as we share the screen again. And thank you for sharing there. This class consists of 5 texts tonight. The first is by Martin Buber. Yay, Martin Buber. If you hear the word Martin Buber, what should you be thinking, by the way? I think you mouthed it, Kendra.
Sorry, I and thou.
Yeah, ich und du, right? I and thou. Martin Buber, I and thou, right? The first text by Martin Buber identifies 2 forms of faith, one focused on relationship, the other focused on dogma. The next 2 texts are examples of these 2 positions. One is from Genesis 15, our friend Abraham, later in his life than we've looked at Genesis 12 twice already, right? This is Genesis 15. And the other is Rambam again, Maimonides' 13 Principles of Faith. So one of those is faith in, and the other is faith that. One of this is about relationship, and the other is about a process. And then the final 2 are not about this faith in versus faith that. They're illustrations of what leading a faithful life might mean. For Zelda, and I echo parts of this in my own belief about God. Zelda, the contemporary Israeli poet, focuses on a framework of meaning that a life of faith provides. And Reb Nachman of Bratslav, who we'll talk about, focuses on faith as trusting in possibility and therefore being able to take risk. So if we are ready, Martin Buber, who I mentioned last week. Buber lived from 1878 until 1965. I had an indirect connection with him in that one of my friends and teachers, somebody who is still alive, who made Aliyah many years ago, is Rabbi Hank Skirbel. who was the head of the Reform Movement youth programs in Israel for many years, and then went in to be one of the deputy heads of the Jewish Agency. Hank Skirbel studied early on, and before the Reform Rabbinate had their first year in Jerusalem, he studied for a time at the Hebrew University. And then he went to Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati. And he wanted to get credit for having taken a class on Martin Buber. And the bureaucracy of our seminary at the time said no. And he said, why not? He said, well, they said Buber doesn't teach Buber the way we teach Buber. But Martin Buber was one of the giants of Jewish thought of the last 100 years, an Austrian Jewish and then Israeli philosopher, best known for his philosophy of dialogue as a form of existentialism, centered on the distinction, which we talked about last week, between wanting to get out of the grocery store and not really care if the pikida, the cashier, is in the middle of a bad breakup with her boyfriend because you want to use her. You want to use her to get out of the store. That's an I-it relationship versus a deep, deep understanding of like where another person is coming from, a really sense of being in that person's shoes, an I-thou relationship. Born in Vienna, he came from a family of observant Jews, but while deeply Jewishly spiritual, broke with Jewish custom and was not Orthodox. He wasn't exactly Reform either, but fascinating person. One of the real greats, along with Heschel, along with others. I'll summarize from this. He was a Zionist in Germany, but during the rise of Nazism, he was one of those, along with Franz Rosenzweig, who provided the backbone of adult education and the German Jewish and education about Judaism for German Jews before he finally had enough and got out and got to Israel. He was nominated for the Nobel Prize in Literature 10 times and for the Nobel Peace Prize 7 times. A fascinating person. So here we are with source number 1, who I need to move my, I'm now focusing on Ben Kraft. Let me spotlight myself and then focus on me. Okay, whoops. Who would like to read source number 1 from Martin Buber? It's short.
There are 2.
Go ahead. I heard somebody start. There are 2.
There are 2, and in the end, only 2 types of faith. To be sure, there are very many contents of faith, but we only know faith itself in 2 basic forms. Both can be understood from the simple date of our life. The one from the fact that I trust someone without being able to offer sufficient reasons for my trust in him. The other from the fact that, likewise, without being able to give a sufficient reason, I acknowledge the thing to be true.
So one is faith in, as we said, relationship. And by the way, Marilyn, this is, as I said, the distinction between what you said earlier and me. I come to God through an analogy of the human experience. And acknowledging a thing to be true doesn't mean that it is true, right? I'll give you an example of that. In a number of years ago, 75% of Americans surveyed believed that there was life after death. A few years after that, 85% of Americans believe that there is life after death. What does this teach us?
People were grasping for something.
Okay, that's great. What doesn't it teach us?
Whether there is life after death.
That's correct. It says absolutely nothing about whether it's true with a capital T. It doesn't make life after death any more likely just because you've taken a survey and more people believe it, right? Even the faith that I have faith that something is true is, as you were, a choice or a leap of faith. Faith in is a trusting sense of your relationship to another person. So, I'm covering up there we go. Belief in is trust in a relationship. Belief that ideas and truths. I'm going to go to review the key ideas here. Buber classifies the 2 types of faith we have seen and we haven't seen them yet because I took this from the wrong place. We're about to look at Genesis 15 and Maimonides' 13 principles. Faith can have one of two main orientations. It can revolve around a relationship that we might call faith in, or around a creed we might call faith that. And let's get, okay, I will do the last question here. So let me stop the share. Who do you trust and why? We started this earlier and Mark said, you got to give me a reason to trust you. Ben,
Because you're
yeah, Ben, go ahead.
close.
Yeah. Me,
Andrea, you're next. Ben, then Andrea.
I basically trust every new person that I meet until they give me a reason not to.
God bless you. I love Ben Craft. Okay. Andrea.
Because you're close to someone, because you've been with them, you believe in them, that you know them from a long time or from having a relationship, then you believe in that person.
So it's not just the relationship, it's also an element of experience, right?
Correct. Correct.
So it's something that builds up, right? Okay, any other comments here? Who don't
I
you
just want to
trust?
say that I 100% agree with Ben. That, and I like that. And
And I
I'm not,
think that
and I'm not with that.
get older, you may trust them.
And to be on the other side, I 100% disagree with Ben.
Okay.
All right, I may meet somebody, a stranger, okay, and I've moved to two places where my wife and I moved to two places. First the island here, and second the city we came from. We didn't know a soul when we moved up there, okay, and we didn't know a soul when we moved down here. All right, I may like somebody, but that doesn't mean I trust them. All right, I don't trust them until I come to a situation where I can make up my own judgment of whether they deserve my trust or not. I'm not going to say the presumption of trust is I've been burned too many times by that. And I've seen other people burned too many times by that.
Yeah, so I was going to say, Mark, I've got a couch in my office. We can talk about sort of what it was that led you to this. No, sorry, I'm just kidding. You know, so
I have a thing about trust as well, and I have something to say about trust. Trust is very difficult for a person who has always been not accepted. And when you are a not accepted person for whatever reason it is, it makes it difficult. So that's my thing about trust.
I believe with all my heart, even if I am not 100% at this, I believe with all my heart that the most important thing about a synagogue service is not whether you sing Adon Olam the way my grandfather did it, or the way your grandmother did it, or what percentage of Hebrew or English is in the service, or even whether you sing on key, because I certainly can't, but how you make people feel when they come together. With all my heart. So thank you, Karen, for sharing. Ellen?
I absolutely wholeheartedly agree with what you said, as you well know.
It's fascinating because Ellen is the daughter of somebody whose primary interest in Judaism was the great ideas, the abstract concepts, right? But, you know, I'm excited about those too. I'm an intellectual, I mean, or a pseudo-intellectual or whatever, right? I pretend, I play one on TV. But the most important thing is how you feel, is feeling welcome, is feeling wanted, is feeling included and embraced. Okay, let's go on. I can do a sermon on that. I have done a sermon on that. Let's go back, as Warner Wolf would have said, let's go back to the videotape. Let's go to the videotape. So here is source 2. This is an illustration of the idea of faith in. So let me see if there's one slide or two here. Yeah, there's 2 slides. So it's a little longer than the last one, but we do need volunteers. So who can read this one for us?
I can if you want.
Thank you.
Af- After these things, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision, saying, "Fear not, Abram, I am your shield. Your reward shall be exceedingly great." And Abram said, "O Lord God, what will you give me, seeing I remain childless? And Eliezer of Damascus shall possess my house?" And Abram said, "Behold, you have not given me offspring, and one born in my house shall be my heir." Behold, the word of the Lord came to him, saying, "This man shall not be your heir,
Whoops,
but
sorry. Go ahead.
but one that shall come from you will be your heir."
Which is a problem, of course, because he's childless. Go ahead.
God brought him outside and said, "Look now toward heaven and count the stars. If you are able to count them," God said to him, "so shall your offspring be." And he believed in the Lord, and God reckoned it to him as righteousness. God said to him, "I am the Lord that brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land to inherit it." And he said, "O Lord God, how shall I know that I shall inherit it?"
Okay, so there's two really interesting things going on here. One is he's arguing with God. What does that imply about the two of them?
They're equal.
I'm not sure. In a law firm, if one person's the senior partner and another person's a junior partner, they're both partners, but I'm not sure they're equal.
He's not afraid.
Well, he's not afraid. Let's put it this way. If God is supposed to be all powerful and everybody else is subservient to that, arguing with God is not a real good idea.
Well, and yet Abraham does it occasionally, which means basically they have a relationship. There's a
Right,
give and
he feels
take there.
But
comfortable enough to do it.
it gives
Right.
him a certain amount of hubris, okay, to argue with God.
Absolutely. However,
So
what's
asking
the
for, he's also
important-
asking for
Just he has faith
evidence.
in God. He has faith in God that he won't be harmed.
Yeah, that's the most important line here, I think, verse 6. There's no evidence of God fulfilling God's promise, but God says God will do it. And so Abram, he believed in the eternal.
So he had faith.
Faith here is as a relationship, a trust or belief in, or reliance on. This is not about abstract truth or principles. We're going to hold on more discussion here and go on to the next text. Now, we met Rambam last week. Rabbi Moses ben Maimon, a 12th century rabbi, legal scholar, rationalist, philosopher, and physician. He was a major Jewish philosopher of the medieval period. He was a major philosopher of the medieval period. Last week, I showed a picture of Mishnah Torah in which he organized Jewish life. But today, the source we come from today is not from Moreh Nevuchim, Guide for the Perplexed. That's really complicated stuff. We may encounter that later, but not yet. This source is his commentary to the Mishnah, the introduction to chapter 10 of Tractate Sanhedrin. Now, I will say something about this. You know what I'm about to show you, but you don't know that you know it. I am going to attempt to share something with you. I hope I don't break the internet by doing it. What I'm about to share with you goes like this. Da 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 da. What is that?
Sounds like one of the prayers.
Well, which one?
I'm trying to figure out.
Usually
Is
a
it one in,
closing
is it one
song.
on high holidays?
It has been done on the high holidays often. It's Yigdal.
Ah,
Yigdal Elohim Chai. Da, 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 da. Yigdal is probably the reason why what we're about to show you survives. And I'm going to make a comment that those of you who know me well will understand as poetry and prose. Sometimes we are able to sing things that we cannot say. That is I think that Maimonides' 13 Principles of Faith which I'm about to show you. I don't believe in all of them. I'm not sure you believe in all of them. And guess what? I don't think that
You believe in all of them?
I don't think that he believed in all of them, especially number 13. It goes against a lot of what he taught in Guide for the Perplexed. But for a foundation for Amcha, for the common folk, this is what he wrote in his introduction to chapter 10 of the commentary on the Mishnah, tractate Sanhedrin. So who would like to read this? Okay, don't all jump at once. Who would like to read this? It's in 2 slides.
I'll take it.
Go ahead.
I believe with perfect faith that the Creator, whose name shall be blessed, is the creator and leader of every created thing. And God self-made, does make and will make everything.
Yeah,
I believe with perfect faith. I believe with perfect faith that the Creator, whose name shall be blessed, is the only one, and there is no unity in any like God's, and God alone is our God, who was, is, and will always be.
So when we say at a football game, we're number 1, that's not the same thing as saying the God, Hero Israel, the eternal our God, the eternal God is one, right? So keep going, number 3.
I believe with perfect faith that the Creator, whose name shall be blessed, is nobody, and all properties of matter.
No body, has no body. No body.
And all properties of matter do not apply to God, and there can be no physical comparison to God at all.
Yeah, when we say God is strong, we're saying God is not weak. Go ahead.
I believe with perfect faith that the Creator, whose name shall be blessed, was the first and will remain the last. I trust with full trust that the Creator, whose name shall be blessed only to God, that there is right to pray, and there is no point in praying to any being beside God. I believe with perfect faith that all words of the prophets are true. I believe with perfect faith that the prophecy of our Rabbi Moses, may he rest in peace, was true, and he was the father of the prophets, both those who came before him and those after him.
Rick.
Go ahead, number 8.
I believe with perfect faith that the entire Torah that we have in our possession is the same that was given to our Rabbi Moses. I believe with perfect faith that our Torah won't be exchanged, and there will never be any other Torah from God whose name shall be blessed. I believe with perfect faith that the Creator, whose name shall be blessed, knows all actions of human beings, their thoughts, as it is written, Psalm 33:15. Who fashions the hearts of them all? Who comprehends all their actions? I believe with perfect faith that the Creator, whose name shall be blessed, gives rewards for those who keep the commandments and punishes those who transgress them. I believe with perfect faith in the coming of the Messiah. And although the Messiah may tarry, even so I wait every day for the Messiah's coming.
You know that in song also as a separate song. Ani ma'amin, ani ma'amin, ani ma'amin, right? But now that we're at number 13, I'll read number 13. I do not believe that Maimonides believed this. I believe for perfect faith that there will be a revival of the dead at the time when it shall please God, whose name shall be blessed, and God's mention shall be elevated forever and ever.
That mean they're zombies?
Well, right. This is a type of medieval Jewish writing which tries to standardize and systematize faith. It was very popular in the Muslim world at the time, and laying out clear principles of belief. Rather than focus on the subjective aspect of each person's relationship with God, Maimonides, at least here, wants believers to be able to hold common truths about God and their religion. Compare this with how Maimonides described God in last week's source. Actually, that probably should have been a description of Abraham. There, he saw Abraham as making his own way to truths about the divine. No, that is correct. Abraham made his own way to truths about the divine. In this passage, Maimonides codifies what some of those truths should be. In this way, Rambam offers an Abrahamic path for all Jews. So, faith as relationship, faith as creed. How are these different? How does they're not mutually exclusive, but how does religious life look and feel when emphasizing one or the other? Faith as relationship, faith as creed. What does religious life look like if you're emphasizing one or the other?
Well, this looks like faith as a creed. I mean, what it reminds me of, and again, maybe because I'm a lawyer, it looks like original intent. All right, that you have all this thing about what God's supposed to be, and his 13 rules set out this what must be, and any deviation from that is not allowed.
Yes, although the trick of the original intent is, if you read the guide for the perplexed, who do he think the original intent is best written by?
God.
No, Aristotle.
All right.
Right? Guide for the Perplexed, he is neo-Aristotelian, and he reads Aristotle in, right? He reads the Bible through the eyes of an Aristotelian. But, you know, that's his version of his original intent. But you're right, he's claiming its original intent here. It's explicit in the claim. It's just
It's not to be questioned. It's
Right.
not to be questioned.
Blind faith, the term blind faith, that you can't question anything.
Well, although for him, questioning
is
what gets you to this, is what leads to this. But what is a faith that is based on belief that? What is a faith that's believed in truth? What's that look like in practice? What happens in a community when you get people that don't agree with those beliefs?
You got conflict, maybe conflict.
Well, yeah, exactly. Rachel, I saw your hands. That's correct. Right? As Julie once very astutely said about synagogue life, split happens. The best example I can think of this, though, is American Protestantism. I mean, I once met somebody who was a bishop. I said, "Oh, cool. Like, tell me about, how many churches is your diocese or whatever." He said, "Oh, just mine." He's like, "I didn't agree with like the other one down the road, so I declared my." Well, let's let Ellen back in. I didn't agree with the guys down the road on a slight matter of faith, so I, declared myself a bit, right. The ways in which American Protestant groups split over belief. I mean, to a Jew, that's nuts, right? We split over much larger things than, I mean, we have different streams, but it's not quite over belief in the same way. On the other hand, what does a faith that's really based on relationship look like?
It's based on trust. You trust your partner, you trust your spouse.
So when does split happen in that kind of faith tradition?
When
If
you don't
somebody
agree.
decides to go out, if someone decides to go out and cheat on them, And
When
you
there's
So in
betrayal.
this case, it's not,
But yeah, when you feel betrayed.
not disagreement, but disappointment,
Betrayal.
It's
right?
a loss of faith.
A feeling of somebody who's not there for you can, right? So the strengths and weaknesses of both of these, I hope, are clear. Let's go back to the, let's go back to the slides. Share. So these are already we have covered the first three. And we've seen ways in which these two can work together or how they might stand in tension. Let's see. So what are your creeds? Where do they come from? What creeds have you rejected? I'm going to stop the share again. What are your creeds? Where do they come from? And what have you rejected?
I think a too rigid interpretation that it has to be a certain way, and that's the way it has to be for everyone, is something that tends to exclude people and takes away from being able for everyone to experience faith in the way they personally experience it, yet have some sort of community about coming together over more broader principles or ideas. So I guess I feel like the more rigid list, like those 13 things, is restricting, and it tends to, I guess, turn faith into dogma, which is a word you used, but that seems to me to make it more rote. It's a little easier because, oh, I have this list and I know exactly what I'm supposed to think, but it takes away from actually thinking about it.
But a lot of beliefs have come down from your teachings, from your parents, from your family, from school. Things, you take in all of these beliefs or understandings, and then you kind of sift through it and decide what you're going to keep and what you're going to discard, what makes sense to you and what doesn't.
I actually, if I may, I'd like to run something past you as a group and also maybe get a rabbinical input on this. Let me see if I can make it really short and sweet.
Yeah, because it sounds like that your prelude is may take us too far afield. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll make it short and sweet. Over a period of decades, I've ping-ponged around on all sorts of matters of faith and creed and belief in God, non-belief in God, etc. And frequently I would run into any number of people from many different faith traditions who said, you got to settle on something. And then about 5 years ago, it dawned on me. I said, for me, the struggle is the path. And once I came to the conclusion that, in a sense, my creed was, I'm the type of guy who simply struggles with this, suddenly the difficulty of it all sort of evaporated. And I sort of live with the process of ping-ponging as my creed, if you will.
So that what's interesting about that is that the next two texts show sort of what a life of faith can do for us in two different ways, rather than focused on it's sort of like there are benefits to a life of faith, rather than worrying about whether it's exactly true or not. I'm going to give an example that a story some of you know. I'm going to try to do the PG-13 version of this and not the R-rated version of this. Kendra, you probably already know where I'm going with this story, but I'm going to, since Marilyn and I have strong disagreements on the subject of kashrut, I am going to tell you, which Marilyn I do not think has ever heard, the story of how I came to first consider keeping kosher, because pepperoni pizza is and was my favorite food in this world. I certainly did not grow up keeping kosher, although I remember my dad's story of the first time he had a cheeseburger. He was really happy to do it. And then he went into the bathroom and his Orthodox stomach threw it up. But he, for him, it was an act of rebellion. It was, so I'm going to try to tell this story without being offensive and without going, remember, I'm 19 years old, I'm not married, and I'm American. An American male who's 19 years old. I was in Israel my junior year of college, and I wonder, I mean, this is partially about faith and partially about how I came to something, but it reaches back to the question of peoplehood and ahead to the question of practice. But for some reason, something one of you said sparked this for me now. We worked in between the Ulpan for learning Hebrew in the summer, and the time that classes began was 6 weeks, a 6-week gap because of the high holidays and other things. So I decided to go volunteer on the Reform Movement kibbutz, Kibbutz Yahel. And what I didn't realize, if you work for a month on a kibbutz, they'll give you a week paid vacation anywhere in Israel. It's 1980. Israel has not yet withdrawn from Sinai. So I go into the Sinai Peninsula. Ellen, I think you know the story too. I apologize for retelling it. But I go into the Sinai Peninsula and we are going, want to go, snorkeling. And I'm with Sharon Cohen, who's a rabbi today. That's not relevant, but it is relevant that she was with us, as you'll see in a moment. So we get down to the shore and the beach at Di Zahav, and we put down a few shekels for a thatched hut that we will stay in that night with all 4 of us. And we go down to the beach, and there's a very large group of, okay, PG-13 version, Swedish women playing volleyball. I won't go into what they couldn't do once Egypt took over the Sinai anymore, and exactly what they looked like. My feet stop working. I don't know how much time goes by until I feel a sharp pain in my ribs. It's Sharon Cohen's elbow. So we hike about 1 kilometer down the beach. We're kind of near where the Bedouin village is. We go snorkeling for hours. We look up and we see this guy walking on the water. It's not Jesus. It's a Bedouin villager. And he's got these 2 huge things in his hands. Now they're lobsters. And I remember that, well, I will tell you, for those of you who eat lobster, that tropical lobster does not taste as good as like cold water lobster, like from Maine, right? But you can't beat how fresh this was. He invited us into his tent. We paid a few more shekels and had a great dinner. And as the dinner is finished, and before the shells are taken away, and as we are being served mint tea by both of his wives, he says to us the following, which is 2 words in Hebrew. And I remember that Israel has occupied Sinai. We are talking to him in Hebrew the entire time. This Bedouin villager does not know English. He knows the language of the occupier. So he pointed at the shells and he says the following. Asur lihudim. These are forbidden to Jews, And for the first time in my life, it occurred to me that because of something I was doing, someone was assuming that I was not Jewish. It took me several years after that, but that is the first time I ever really thought, the first time I really encountered the idea that identity is not just, I'm an American 19-year-old. I am who I say I am, and nobody's going to tell me what to do. That's the problem we're having in our country right now, right? The balance between me and we. But I really, that was a great I do not keep kosher because I think it's an ultimate truth. If I put the knife in the wrong drawer, I do not think I'm going to get zapped by lightning. I do not think it comes from a Maimonidean kind of absolute truth. For me, it is about relationship. It is a relationship with my people, with my tradition, with my heart. And look at me. I'm trying to lose weight now, but I obviously like food. right? So for me, the idea that I have to, at every meal, I have to think, how is it grown? Where does it come from? What is it? And a connection to my people was a deeply, deeply powerful spiritual moment. So that touches on practice and it touches on peoplehood. But at this moment, when we're in the idea of faith, for me, it wasn't a Maimonidean truth. It was very much a Martin Buber relationship with my people, inspiration for me. And I do not keep kosher so strictly that I couldn't eat in somebody else's house. That is a sort of limit for me. So that I think is, I just give you that as, without wanting just to tell the racy story, although I have fun with that story, and I didn't tell all of it. I have, by the way, I did tell this to a colleague of mine who wrote a great book called Settings of Silver. If you want a single volume introduction to Judaism, I still recommend that as the best one. Settings of Silver. I told this to a group of rabbis at a convention once, and he tapped me on the shoulder afterwards when I was done, and he said, you know those, I described how they were dressed or not dressed, the Swedish volleyball players? I said, yeah. He said, Asur Yehudim, you know. Those are forbidden to Jews, you know. Anyway, I share that story with you because it brings together, I think, peoplehood, faith, and practice. So I talked for way longer than I expected to today. So let's go back to the share. And moving on from faith in and faith that, moving on from that distinction, we are going to get very different emphases now on meaning making. What kind of meaning does faith bring into a life? In other words, what kind of a life of faith leads to what kind of life? So we're going to look at two different texts here. The first is by Zelda. She's just known as Zelda, but here's her full name. Does anybody, without reading all the way to the bottom, recognize that maiden name?
Schneerson, Rabbi
Schneerson.
Yeah, that's right. She, as you can see, she is
Rabbi
related.
Schneerson.
Yes, she is related to the Lubavitcher Rebbe. That's correct.
Menachem Mendel Schneerson. Yeah,
Right.
the Lubavitcher.
The Rebbe, right?
Yeah.
Widely known as Zelda, lived from 1914 to 1984. Was an Israeli poet. She was born in the Russian Empire. The daughter of Sholom Schneerson and Rachel Hen. Her father was the great-grandson of the third Lubavitcher Rebbe, Menachem Mendel Schneerson. That's the first Menachem Mendel Schneerson, also known as the Tzemach Tzedek. Her family came to Jerusalem in 1926. So she's from a very traditional background, Hasidic background. Her mother, Rachel Hen, was a daughter of Rabbi David Tzvi Chen of Chernigov and a descendant of the Sephardic dynasty, so that she combines Ashkenazi religiosity and Sephardic religiosity. She attended a religious school for girls in British Palestine, then studied at the Teachers College of the Mizrahi movement. She moved to Tel Aviv and then Haifa, and then returned to Jerusalem. And amongst her students was Amos Klausner, who later Hebraized his name and is now more widely known as Amos Oz. To those of you who don't know the name Amos Oz, guys, look it up. Zelda's first cousin was Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, the seventh Chabad Rebbe. So here is a short, very short, reading from Zelda. Who would like to do the English?
I've got it.
Go ahead.
I shall not float unreined in space, lest a cloud swallow the thin band in my heart that separates good from evil. I have no existence without the lightning and thunder that I heard at Sinai.
Wow. Reactions to that?
Takes her meaning from her religion, from Judaism.
Whether or not it's like intellectually, philosophically exactly true, right? Not even focusing on, but what does faith do for her?
It gives her meaning, existence, her being.
Well,
This is faith as a framework, a grounding. This is not a focus.
I can't help but pay attention to the last couple of words where she, if I'm interpreting it correctly, she's tying all of that into the land, a specific space on earth, Sinai. It seems difficult to separate that out from the other reflections on faith in that
Yeah,
text.
in Jewish, I hear you, except that I want to say it's Sinai. It's not Tel Aviv
Uh-huh.
or Jerusalem or Haifa. If
Uh-huh.
she said Jerusalem and the temple, you would be right, and it might be a reflection of Zionism. In
Mhm.
Jewish tradition, and David, I think your insight is correct that there's specificity here that I'm glossing over. But in Jewish tradition, Sinai is known as being Hefker. Now, Hefker is a term in Jewish law which means ownerless property. The very fact is that Sinai is not in the land of Israel.
Oh.
And the fact that the Torah is given at Sinai is like saying anybody could have done this.
Ah.
Right? Or one of the ideas about the burning bush, which of course was at Sinai before the revelation of the Torah. It's where Moses first saw the vision. Remember that Jewish tradition, which doesn't like miracles. Jewish tradition is a rationalist tradition. It said, what was the bush? The bush was who is it? Three Dog Night? No, Billy Joel. It was. Am I right that it's Billy Joel? Maybe not. Always burning since the. Oh, come on.
That sounds like Billy Joel. That sounds like that Billy Joel song.
Always burning since the world's been turning.
Yeah.
Right.
We never start the fire or something like that.
We didn't start the fire. That's it. That's Billy Joel, right?
Yeah.
That is Billy Joel.
Okay.
Yes, that is Billy
Thank
Joel.
you. I know you didn't recognize it from my
You're
singing.
welcome.
If it's always burning, what is the greatness of Moses? What made Moses different?
He saw it.
He noticed it. Or even he noticed it and then turned aside to go to it, right? So Sinai is this sort of no man's land. But I think what's interesting is it's not the words at Sinai. It's the experience, it's the thunder, right? So it's rooted in the specific, but what is it that's rooted? What is it that grounds her? Living a life of faith grounds her in, and she says it right and wrong. And I will share with you, for me, I relate to this. I have two pillars of my own personal faith in God. One is particle physics. I believe in the relationship between the idea of the Shema and the created universe, the idea of the oneness of the universe. And we talked about this, the grand unified field theory. I mean, to me, this is spirituality, that everything is connected. That's science. But the other pillar of my own personal faith is this. I need a world in which the Nazis are wrong. I don't mean they're wrong because they lost, because what would that be?
Relativism.
That's correct. Or might makes right or whatever, right? I need a world in which the Nazis are absolutely wrong. And if humanism is all there is, I have talked to a lot of humanists about ethical and moral philosophy. If humanism is all there is, then ultimately, how do you make the argument that one human philosophy is better than another human philosophy? What if 100,000 people believe in one philosophy, but 500,000 people believe in another? You know, what if the Nazis get elected? What if the 2024 never mind, I'm not going to go there.
Well, Rabbi, I have a response to that, possibly in the same way that Mark was speaking from his background as an attorney. I'm speaking from my background as a communication specialist, communication professor, and I would say that there is no absolute measure. It really is a measure of how effectively you can make the argument. You know, it's a rhetorical effectiveness.
And what I find unsatisfying about that is that it comes back to Peter's point. That's if relativism isn't the right word, then effectiveness. And to me, effectiveness is a kind of I need a world in which the Nazis are wrong.
Yeah.
And not just because they lost. To me, I find a foundation of God in science, and I find a foundation of God in morality. So to me, the Zelda reading.
But isn't there a concern, and this is what worries me, is that we think we know what wrong means, like there should be some collective idea based on the Ten Commandments or morality or whatever. And obviously,
well, the Ten Commandments, we're reading the Ten Commandments as one of the texts next week.
Okay, but obviously that Nazis are wrong. But then you have other people who are just as convinced that they are right and others are wrong, and they believe something that, in my view, is horrible and cruel.
I moved to Washington.
Do with that.
I moved to Maryland in 2001. And Peter and Kendra may remember this from Buffalo. It was one of my last sermons in Buffalo. Because in the spring of 2001, the Taliban had just blown up those Buddhist statues. Do you remember this?
Yes.
So I said in words that could not have been more prophetic. I said this Yom Kippur, I said this in May of 2001. This Yom Kippur, think about the Taliban. Oh my God, did we think about the Taliban that Yom Kippur, right? But what I meant by that, and then I came and I started my 10th grade confirmation students. And these American 10th graders, God bless them. I tried to say something about the Taliban to them, or about like clitoridectomies, right? Some cultures where baby girls' clitorises are cut off. The Taliban not allowing girls to learn how to read. And how dare I suggested to these 10th graders that the Taliban were wrong. And what did they say? Oh, that's their culture.
Right.
How can you say that? That's just a matter of opinion. And American individualists who believe that all opinions are equally valid. I want to cherish diversity and people who have very different and welcome people who have very different views than me. I do not, if you push me against the wall, I do not believe that all opinions are equally valid. I'm sorry, I don't. Rachel, you've been giving great facial expressions here. Any reaction to this?
I'm sorry, my face never lies. No, I was a middle school teacher for over 10 years for the past 12 years. So you can just imagine what that was like. And that was every day. You're just giving me flashbacks. It was really hard to feel like you could stand up for what you believed was right when there was this other idea of having to respect and understand everyone all the time.
I mean, the ridiculous the extreme of this was just happened in Texas the other day. Did you see this news story? Right? Somebody, I don't know exactly how this happened, but somebody in Texas said they were teaching something about the Holocaust, and some teachers said,
in view.
you have to present both views.
Right.
I'm sorry, both views on one.
Good news.
Right?
The good news about the Holocaust.
Here's the thing about the Charlottesville rally in 2018.
You mean there are good people on both sides?
Right, good people on both sides. 2017 and the January 6th insurrection. Here's the thing. If you're marching next to Nazis, you're on the wrong side.
Sometimes you have to stop thinking and just go kill them.
I agree with that wholeheartedly.
But the connection.
Well, I was listening to something just the other day talking about how the obsession with trying to think there are two sides to everything has led a lot of well-meaning people into giving too much credence to things that are now coming to harm us. Like there aren't two sides to whether there's climate change anymore. It
Right.
exists. There aren't two sides to the Holocaust. There aren't two sides to, whether, misogyny is okay. I mean, there aren't two sides to everything, and both sides of these debates are not equal. There aren't two sides to whether. So-
Right, and maybe
Just
I'm
have to
getting,
say no.
for example, what? Now you muted yourself.
There aren't two sides to whether the earth is flat. I mean, sometimes you just have to say, no, there is
That
no
is the
other.
example.
This is what it is. I
Right,
saw. a
and you
wonderful
don't need to
post,
give
by the way.
you don't need to give equal weight to both sides of the earth, right? And that is the argument that I have been using with people who are not getting vaccinated.
And I saw a great post, by the way, from William Shatner that said, the earth is round. I looked.
I posted that on my Facebook page. I took it from my brothers. I will add to that. There are things I will not debate. I will not debate with people. I will debate with people Israel's policies. I will not debate with people Israel's right to exist. It's just not a debate I'm willing to have. I'm not going to debate I'm not going to debate our collective suicide as a people. It's not up for debate. There's not two sides to it. I know that's a very controversial position, but that's just, don't even, for me, right? I won't debate the anti-vax position. And I won't debate whether the earth is round. It is. So anyway, but to me, morality does not always work that way, though. The point was, we'd like to think that when we used to think that there was, when you mentioned the 10 Commandments, Carol, a common set of morality that all human beings shared. But it's a little more complicated than that. I hope we can come to some sense of a common ground, but it's fuzzy, it's not clear, and not all that easy. And you look at the way that women are treated, and in societies in which I think mistreat women terribly, they think that they're doing the right thing, and that's their expression of morality. So it's not the case that what the 19th century philosophers taught about universalism. I debated this, Ellen, with your dad. Ellen, are you still there? There you are. Debated this with your dad, who was a great believer that if you just think right, everybody will come to the same conclusion. Well, Maimonides believed that. Ash Garrett believed that. I'm not so sure. But what I will say is that Zelda's idea that faith gives us a life of meaning rooted in our sense of right and wrong is clearly, I mean, for me, that speaks very clearly to me. So now let's do the final one for tonight. Share. I don't mean Sunny and share. Oh, this text illustrates how faith can ground a person in our lives. What faiths ground us, and how did you come to faith? Or with so many options of how to live, and this is what David was talking about, right? David Weber. Did I get your name right?
Yes.
How do we choose the way to live which is right for us? And have you ever felt unreined the way that she describes? All right, I've talked for too long tonight, so I'm going to move on so we can get finish up and then give you a chance to talk more without my interfering. Zelda emphasized faith as a choice one makes. She further emphasizes that she makes this choice not necessarily out of dogma or relationship, but out of the desire to have an anchor in her life. She asserts that a life of faith makes one less untethered in the world, and a life of faith gives one a framework for right and wrong. Doesn't say that it is absolute right and wrong. It gives you a framework for right and wrong. It's not exactly the same thing. We've all seen examples of faith, how faith can stabilize a person in their life, whether we agree with their, the faith statements they make or not. Okay, we finally now come to Nachman of Breslov. Those of you who have been with me in Israel may remember that there was graffiti all over Israel, which went Nachman, Mu'uman, right? It's a magical incantation statement that has become popular in recent years by the sort of followers of Reb Nachman. A chassid, the word chassid means a disciple, and therefore it means a disciple of a rebbe. Now, what happens when a rebbe does not have a successor? In fact, that's what's going on in the Lubavitch world right now. And the Lubavitch, the Chabad, are saying the rebbe died without any children. The last rebbe, and remember, the last rebbe, Menachem Mendel Schneerson, was the son-in-law, not the son of the previous rebbe. So they said, well, I mean, he was just so great that he can't be replaced. So the only person who could replace him would be the Messiah, or maybe even he is the Messiah, right? So that is, so a certain percentage of within the Chabad world actually believe that the late Rebbe Schneerson was the Messiah. Others say he was merely the greatest human being who ever lived. I have a problem with the cult of personality here, but there's another Hasidic movement. Remember, not all Jews are Orthodox. Not all Orthodox Jews are Haredi, which means ultra-Orthodox. Not all Haredi Jews are Hasidic. Of the Hasidic Jews, there are very different groups. Chabad is only one of them. Another one is the Breslavers, or the followers of Reb Nachman of Bratslav. He did not have a successor, and so people travel back to look at his chair. Or they go to his grave. But Reb Nachman, a great-grandson of the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Hasidic Judaism, combined the secrets of the Kabbalah with in-depth Torah scholarship. He attracted thousands during his lifetime. His influence continues today through many Hasidic movements, primarily the Breslov Hasidim. His philosophy revolves around closeness to God and speaking to God in normal conversation as you would to a friend. In this way, it's a little bit like Buber. In 1802, he moved to the town of Bratslav, and here he declared, "Today we have planted the name of Breslover Hasidim." But his move to the town of Breslov, he had to move for his health eventually, and he eventually wound up living in a town called Uman, which is where, when people visit his grave, that is where they are going. So this is the background on Reb Nachman of Breslov, and I have always used the Hartman teaching material as a way of sort of teaching about teachers, and not only the texts, but also, who wrote the text. So I hope you're getting background on Rambam and Zelda and Martin Buber and Reb Nachman and others who we have looked at so far. So who wants to read this from Likutei Maharan, fairly brief reading from Reb Nachman?
I'll read it. If one plants wheat in good ground, it grows and sprouts beautifully, and no wind nor bolts nor thunderstorms harm it, because of the power of sprouting growing. Therefore, it is not damaged at all. But if one places wheat in a ground that is not good for planting, then it rots in the ground because it does not have the power of sprouting or growing. And faith has the power of sprouting and growing. It is written in Esther 2:7.
Yeah.
And he brought up Hadassah. Its language is one of growth. And just like our sages of blessed memory said, Babylonian Talmud Shabbat 31a, faith is or refers to the order of seeds, one of the 6 orders of the Mishnah.
Before we unpack this, just a comment about texts. A verse from the Bible, like Esther here, cites chapter and verse. So that's Esther chapter 2, verse 7. The Mishnah, which is the first part of the Talmud, is organized that way by sections and subsections, chapters and subsections. But the Babylonian Talmud itself, the page numbers refer to the first version. What does 31a refer to? Anybody know?
No.
Is that the Italian version?
By Italian, you mean the printing press.
The printed, yes.
Yes, this is the first printed version. So these are folio pages, and there is no, if anybody gives you a coin that says 4 BC on it, you know it's a forgery. Why?
They haven't printed before by the. before then.
Nobody called it BC, right?
Right.
So if you see any citation that says it's from the Tractate Talmud, page 1a, you know that's not correct. Why? There is no 1a. What is 1a?
1.
1a is the title page. And then you turn the page and the Talmud begins on the other side of page 1, which is 1b. So these are references to folio pages. So that's what that is. Now let's go back to the content here. This is a different aspect of faith. This is the belief in possibility. Faith allows people to take risks. Why is this about risk? What is it? The analogy that he gave is that this is about risks.
You're not certain if when you plant the seed, it's going to grow or what the ground is and what's going to happen.
Planting a seed is the ultimate act of hope.
You hope that it'll grow, that it'll
That's
spread.
correct. It is and therefore, what a great analogy to faith, right? When has faith in someone or something allowed you to take a risk? Or when do you mistakenly take a risk on the basis of faith? Anyone?
Can it be anything?
Yeah.
I hopped on a sailboat with people I didn't know in San Diego that went all the way down to Cabo San Lucas and didn't see land for days. I didn't know them. I didn't know how good sailors they were, and we're still friends to these days.
That could have gone the other way. You're right.
I could be dead.
Peter, I see you talking, but you're muted.
Sorry, I was just curious what would possess you to do such a thing.
I really like sailing, and I wanted to see what it was like out there.
Was this the race or was this a cruise?
This was called the Baja Haha. Aptly named.
Marilyn, what caused you to move to the Virgin Islands?
Followed the man I love.
Oh, okay. You had met him. Okay. Well, what'd your parents think of it?
They were afraid to say anything, and so they went along with the other family, and it was very surprising, but they did go along with it, and they enjoyed it. So it was a leap of faith, and when you were talking about faith, it reminded me of what Ben had said earlier, that having faith until you are proven not to have faith, or that you shouldn't have faith. That seems to be lingering with me through this whole thing that we're talking about when we talk about faith. It's faith in life, and faith in people, and faith in things that happen around you, and you need to have that faith to live a proper and decent and enjoyable life. Anyway,
Yeah,
sorry.
nice. Well, here's a loaded question. Does faith cause anybody to take risks that they shouldn't?
All the time.
How about in the last couple
Myself.
of years?
All
Right?
the
I
time.
will never
But on
forget.
other
I will never forget watching that woman in Kansas talk to CNN after going to an Easter service unmasked in Easter of 2020, saying,
Yeah, God will protect me.
"The blood of Christ will protect me."
Well,
There
that's
are
a
still
terrible example, but there are other ways in which, if you completely refuse to ever take a risk based on faith, life is going to be too small.
That's right.
Okay, go ahead. Okay, she muted
And
herself.
it depends on what you mean by take a risk. You know, taking a risk means that you clearly understand the dangers that could possibly happen. And in life, you take risks and you don't even know what might happen.
So
Well,
the next,
sometimes the risk is not knowing exactly what the dangers are. It's just, I'm going to do something I've never done before, go somewhere I've never been before, try something that I'm kind of afraid of, but if I don't try it, it will be less of a life worth living, whatever. I mean, so you take certain risks, and there are big ones and there are small ones. Like, you know, I took a sailboat risk, maybe not as big as the one that was earlier described. It was just sailing to St. Martin with a bunch of people I didn't know very well. But on the other hand, it was an adventure that was worthwhile. And another one sailing from the Virgin Islands all the way up to Miami with a bunch of people I didn't know very well, which was one of the most amazing things I've ever done, because it was the only time where I've ever been on a boat where, you know, you sail for several days without touching land. So all of that, it's worthwhile.
But you know,
don't let Lucas play with fire.
You said something interesting that triggered something in me, because I'm when I'm talking about risks, there are the things that you know might be harmful, and then there are the things you've never done before. And those, to me, and for me personally, are different kind of risks. I do the ones that I haven't done before. I think twice about the ones that I have a fear might lead to something, you know, harmful.
Like not coming to Florida.
Yeah. Go ahead, Andrea. Want to build on that?
Nothing to do with that.
It is in a way, because you know what's going on in where I live in the state with the governor and with all the mandates that he's not allowing, and that he's suing and fighting, and you're afraid to come into it. You know, the airport, the people. I went into a restaurant today and I wanted to leave because you had servers who were not wearing masks. And the answer was, I'm vaccinated. And I wanted to say, but that's not true. That doesn't. So, I mean, these are all risks that you choose. Do you stay? Do you go? Do you travel? Do you not? Do you go into a clubhouse? In where I live, it's an older community, and the clubhouse has no mask mandate. So they say, well, the CDC says we don't, it's optional. But you have people sitting one next to the other who are in their 80s and 90s, and they don't have to wear a mask. They don't have to be vaccinated. It's all optional. And I can't understand that. Those are all risks.
They have a choice of being there or not, too.
That's true. And my choice is not to go in, and there are others who are saying
the next wedding I am doing is a second marriage. The next wedding I'm doing is a second marriage for both of them. What is the common phrase about second marriages?
The rebounds.
No.
Better the second time around.
No, it's the triumph of hope over experience.
Well, I'm a big fan of second marriages, but you know, some risks are more obviously interesting than others. I'm not willing to take any risks when it comes to COVID. Forget it. I canceled all my appointments at a salon I used to go to for nails and hair because I found out that the staff wasn't vaccinated, and I'm just not going to deal with that, even though I am. I refuse. But that's to me very different.
COVID, this is a very complicated situation we're in, because everybody, you know how in religious life, let's take in Jewish life, everybody, wherever you are Jewishly, you think that anybody who's more traditional than you is crazy Orthodox, and you think that anybody who's less traditional than you is sort of completely secular, right? I think that COVID is a little like that too. I mean, I am buffeted between those who are much more cautious than I am, and those who think that I'm, you know, completely crazy for being cautious at all. We have to find a way, excluding insanity like not being vaccinated. We have to find a way to, work with each other. Let's move on from this general discussion of risk and bring this all back together again to the larger picture. When is faith a source of strength in taking risks in our own lives, not knowing what might come of our actions? We discussed this a little. What do you think of this model of faith? I think, what if you plant the seed and do not see it grow the way you hoped it would? And now we are going to go to the conclusion and reflections and review. For tonight, faith has many faces. For some, faith is oriented towards faith in. It comes from a relationship. For others, faith that, from dogma. Regardless of orientation, however, faith always involves uncertainty and trust. Even if you're saying have faith that and it's certain beliefs, you can't, as Jennifer said at the beginning, you can't always know it for sure. Some are willing to, a lot of time was spent by medieval philosophers trying to prove the existence of God. Some are willing to brave this uncertainty because the life of faith offers a framework for making choices and meaning. The planting of seeds is an act of hope and optimism. To live a life of morality is to be grounded in a foundation. In this session, we addressed a very broad question. What does faith encompass? We began, I'm sorry for the typo there, that should say by, recognizing the difference between faith as a relationship with God and faith as belief in certain truth statements, knowing that the two may not be mutually exclusive. We then move beyond this binary to the way in which faith involves meaning making in life, committing to a certain ethical system, or trusting in possibilities which are beyond our grasp. The next section in the faith curriculum, which we're skipping, we're not doing that, we're moving on to practice next week, recognizes that there is no certainty in the life of faith. It asks what it might mean to believe in something that you can't know with full certainty. Now we're doing that. We're not doing that. We're moving on to the practice section. So that was the last slide for tonight. I am going to stop the screen share and ask for comments, thoughts, reflections for the last few minutes here.
So, Michael, for me, I never thought of faith as all that important in my connection to Judaism. And the framework part of that was really the key for me. What Zelda said spoke to me. Judaism providing a framework for living was, and I consider that independent of faith. But I kind of see how there's an underpinning of faith in there, that an unspoken underpinning of faith in there. Zelda expressed it beautifully, in that you kind of have to say something happened at Sinai if you're going to say Judaism provides a framework for life. So
that's going to be the name of one of my books, by the way. Something happened at Sinai.
Well, that's Chaim Potok in his history of the Jews. Basically says, okay, we don't know exactly what happened at Sinai, but something sure as hell happened at Sinai. And that's kind of where we are. I always thought that was a great just way of summing all that up. I also would say, sorry for taking up the time, that I felt like it took faith on my part to follow Peter on his journey. When I said, well, if you're going to do this, we're all going to do it with you, without really knowing what we were getting into. But figuring, well, this can't be bad. So see where it goes. And here we are.
Yeah, well, it's a good thing we didn't know. We would have run the other way.
No, you would have run the other
just
way.
Kidding.
Since we are still, I'm going to delete this from Facebook in a minute, but can I elaborate on that for a moment? Peter has shared over the last few weeks that his journey to Judaism began not only as an adult, but also after he was married and after he had agreed to raise kids as Catholic. So when I met them, these Kendra and these, wonderful 4 Catholic kids came to Friday night services every single week, and at the synagogue, and that was part of in support of Peter's journey. But yes, that's that could have been, that's been a wonderful way of supporting each other in journeys and in growth of and not knowing the destination, as we talked about last week. Other reactions or comments for now? Folks, I hope you have enjoyed this. I hope I didn't get sort of too personal on you with some of my stories, but I will say one other thing, which is that there are Peter, what you said, I mean, there are those Jews who are just not interested in the topic of faith. It's interesting. I mean, we invented the idea. I mean, we gave to the world the idea of one God, and yet, right? People are far more interested in the horizontal, the connection with other Jews, with the community, with the culture. But what Zelda and Reb Nachman do for us at the end of these is saying that it's not so much faith that something's true, but that this is what a life of faith does for us, which is what David was trying to say earlier. That it's almost like living a life as if, and that's a respectable position. It's not just, a lot of people would make fun of it, but the belief, living your life as if something, might be, that can provide great depth and a great framework and grounding. And that way you don't have to sweat is this exactly right or not? I mean, I like, okay, I put my knife in the wrong drawer. It's so anyway, any final comments from anybody?
Food for thought.
I have one comment, Rabbi, and it dates back to before I became allergic to shellfish and used to be able to eat it. And that is that I disagree very much with one thing you said. I believe Caribbean lobster is way better than Maine lobster.
Well, that is not something
I agree.
That is not something I'm likely to find out unless I change something. I told some of you that, like, one of these Yom Kippurs, when the power went out and the cantor had to be replaced, and like nothing was working. I only got through the day by thinking I was going to have a pepperoni pizza that night. It is the only thing that got me through that day. I didn't, but it's like I haven't had a pepperoni pizza in 40 years, but I like 38 years. But
pizza won't land you in the hospital, and lobster would do that to me.
Well, yeah. So, by the way, so since you're allergic to shellfish, Jewish tradition would say the following. One of the most controversial things you can say about Jewish life, and remember that we're going to deal with next week a little bit the concept of commandment and mitzvah. So I'll do a preview of next week, although I started to put next week's together and this wasn't in it. I should add it. There is a Jewish position that says, and this goes against the grain for Reform Jews, it's better to do something because you are commanded to do it than because you want to. I'm going to leave you with that as homework, and I want you to think about it, and we'll unpack that next week. You can agree with it, you can disagree with it. It sort of flies in the face of Reform Judaism, but I do think that while I cherish the freedom that Reform Judaism does give me, I think Reform Jews suffer from having thrown too far out away the concept of obligation. So that we will talk about. It's better to do something because you're commanded to do it than because you choose to. We'll talk about that and what that means later. Okay, take care, everybody.
Good night.
Aloha.
Good night.
Thank
Good night.
you.